Welcome on in here. I mentioned to Mr. Paul, as I often say on potluck day, I like to give an extra 2 or 3 minutes. I won't speak for you, but I will for our family. We can always use it on potluck morning. So it's good to see everybody. If you don't mind, please do open to the 12th and final chapter of Daniel. We made it. We did it. And I think we'll be able to go ahead and close that out today. Looking forward to our final discussion and what you might term the revelation of Daniel. We're going to come back to that at the end of Bible class. So we have made it to the end, the book of stories and symbols. And we have one final symbolic discussion to have and the final vision of the prophet. So remind me who it is who's been helping Daniel to see and to understand these visions along the way. Who is it who's been an aid to him, like directly? Gabriel. Very good. And so Gabriel, we know, is designation, not so much a title that's given to him as angel, right? He's an angel. You might respond, angels, plural, have helped Daniel throughout. Or you might say, it's the one throughout. I think you can make a case for that. Whichever way you split it, though, there is a proclamation that an angel has to give Daniel in the 12th chapter in the first verse. So let's look at that together. Daniel chapter 12, starting in verse 1, as we close out this incredible series together. The first 3 words of chapter 1 are, at that time. I always like to pause when we encounter statements like these, especially when we're starting a Bible study. And I think it's pertinent to ask, at what time? What time? What's been going on here? You recall from chapter 11 what took place. As I flip backward and then I scroll forward to get to the end because it's a long chapter. 45 verses in Daniel chapter 11. We split this one up into 2 discussions because there was so much to be found. So I want to put up a chart for you that's going to give a fairly good refresher of all this history that we had sorted through in the 11th chapter of Daniel. All right, so of course there's this angel who shows up and is helping him to understand things. And at this point, 536 BC, it's announced to Daniel through this angelic vision that there will be roughly 200 more years of Persian rule, and there will be 4 major kings of the Persians who will rule, and that's going to take us down to 336 BC, 336. Where does Old Testament inspiration end, timeline-wise? Malachi, if that helps. What year is that about? Good, 430, 450. I'm okay with either of those. As a child, I always heard it as 432 BC. It may be that, and it may be a few years different than that. Yeah, somewhere around, let's say 430-ish, okay, BC, give or take. So if you look at 336 BC, we're already 100 years into the intertestamental period through this revelation that's given to Daniel. Remember, the time between the Testaments, Malachi 430 to about 6 or 4 BC, depending on how you look at it. But Daniel actually tells us a whole lot of what's going to happen during this intertestamental period. So we don't have a narration of the intertestaments, but we do have prophecy. And after the Persian rule comes the Grecians, the big guy on the scene, Alexander the Great. He will rule until 323 BC, and if you're noticing at the top, if you want to refresh yourself, there's the range of verses that will discuss each one of these in prophecy. And then you have the battle between the one who rules over the former area, the Babylonians, and then the Persians. But once the Greeks took over, and then of course there's the division of the Grecian Empire, that's the Seleucid Empire, the Seleucid rulers. That's the king of the north versus, relatively speaking, the king of the south and the Ptolemies. The Ptolemies rule over what region? Egypt. Very good. The Egyptian kingdom. And there's strife between the two of those for many years, for generations, and that takes us down to 175 BC. Then the especially vile one, the Bible would say, he steps onto the stage. His name, Antiochus, which number? Very good, 4. Is it a coincidence? That's the earthly number. He does things in an earthly and heavenly way. Antiochus IV Epiphanes, which has to do with a manifestation of God in the name. He thinks a lot of himself, and I think that family in general does. And that takes us down to 164 BC. Okay, where we left off, though, in chapter 11, was talking about what appears to be a storied ruler who reigns for, interestingly enough, 33 years on the heels of one who is to come and to live for 33 years, and that is Herod the Great. At that time, okay, hang on just a second before we go back to chapter 12. I want to look at the very last verse of Daniel 11. At that time, when Herod the Great has been ruling, but verse 45 of Daniel 11 says, "And he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas." That is, between the Mediterranean and probably the Dead Sea. That's going to be in the area of Jerusalem, of course. He will plant the tents of his palace between those two seas, and the glorious holy mountain, that is Jerusalem, yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. It's Flavius Josephus who records the terrible end of this man. He says he literally, physically rotted away and suffered convulsions, and he died. Okay, so it's not a cheery end for this guy. And remember, he wants to make sure there are people who mourn at the time of his funeral. So what does he do? Antiochus Epiphanes, Herod the Great. He's a lot like him, though. There you go. So a lot of other nobles he has put to death so that people would be crying at the time of his funeral. What a great guy. So that's the leader of God's people for 33 years. That takes us to 4 BC, and in the prophecy, Herod the Great has passed away. I hope that helps now as we cross into our last chapter of Daniel, 12 and verse 1. At that time, at what time? Once Herod the Great's reign has been completed, he's died, it's post 4 BC, at that time Michael shall stand up. Who's Michael? Yeah, the archangel. The archangel. His name, Michael, means who is like God. Okay, good. And he's getting ready to say that also? Excellent. So what we know right now is a guy named Michael, which means who is like God. I told you this before. You'll often see a question mark. I don't think it's intended to be an interrogative sentence, personally. I think it's just a declarative statement. There's one who lives in heaven who's like God, is what we're told. And he's the archangel. Angel is messenger. Arch is highest. And so this is the highest messenger of heaven who is like God. He's the great prince or ruler. All right, that's what we know about this character. And as we continue on in verse 1, at that time, the one who is like God from heaven shall stand up. He's the highest messenger that heaven has to share, and he is not a great prince, he is the great prince or ruler. He is the great prince, like God, who stands watch over the sons of your people. Watches over, takes care of like a shepherd, God's people. And there shall be a time of trouble post Herod the Great, post 4 BC. There shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time, Daniel, your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. So let's see if we can figure out these details, since hindsight should be, might not be 20/20, but 15/20-ish for us. Let's see if we can ascertain all that we're being told right here. There shall be a time of trouble understood among God's people, such as has never been as a nation, even to that time. What do you think is being referenced here? Time after 4 BC that's going to be the worst thing Israel has ever experienced. It sounds like any nation has ever experienced. That would sure make a lot of sense, because Jerusalem is going to be destroyed post 4 BC, post Herod the Great. It'll be a little ways down the line, but, big picture, not way down the line. Within 100 years of that, something absolutely awful. I invite you to go back in Daniel to the 9th chapter. We've already covered this, and you'll see some of these prophecies that are provided by Daniel, shared with him via an angel, repeated in a little bit of different forms. We've encountered that many times, and I think that's the same right here. Daniel chapter 9, we'll read verses 26 and 27, which closes out that chapter. And after the 62 weeks, we'll talk more about this as we continue on in Daniel 12. After the 62 weeks, remember the 77s, a lot of our translations have weeks. There's really no basis for that as much as just 77s or heptads, which is a funny word, but 70 sets of 7. And we've gone through and showed how that seems to be years and not weeks. Anyway, and after the 62 sevens, an anointed one, or a Messiah, who do you think that might be, shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And if you look before, they're actually 7 weeks prior, or 7 sevens, and then 62, and you add those together, there's 69 sets of 7, and there are a total of 77s discussed, and that leaves just one. We're going to get to that one today. After the 62 weeks plus the 7 that are mentioned before, an anointed one shall be cut off, a Messiah, and shall have nothing. So he's going to die. And the people of the prince who is to come. Now I know initially that might sound like Jesus and his followers. That's not the reference right here. After Messiah is cut off, there is a prince or a ruler who will arise, and he will lead his people to destroy the city and the sanctuary, a reference to the temple. Who are the people that destroy the sanctuary and the city? Those are the Romans. Okay, so this is not talking about Jesus and his followers. It's another ruler who's not a good one, okay? And what's the ruler's name who will be responsible? Very good. So if you want to look at it as far as a ruler would go, you're looking at Tiberius. Now the general, a Roman general, who's going to be responsible for its destruction, Titus is his name. So you might see that on either front. But Tiberius Caesar is going to have a part in this. The Roman general Titus is going to have a part in this. It's, referencing Jerusalem, shall come with a flood, or rushing in upon them. And to the end that there shall be war, desolations are decreed. Destruction, and the place is going to be left desolate, at least compared to how it was, razed to the ground. Verse 27, and he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. Now again, week's not found there. It's for one of the sevens is the idea. And so for a whole week, which one? Well, we've already covered of the 70-week prophecy, 7, and then 62. 7 plus 62 is 69, which leaves one of the sevens, set of sevens that's left. And he shall make a strong covenant. Who's the he? It seems to be a switch over talking back to the ruler of God's people, the Messiah, who has been cut off. For 1 week, he's going to make a covenant, a strong covenant with many. And for half of that week, he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. So it seems that we're going back and we're covering a portion in which we're going to find when the Messiah is announced, when he comes onto the scene. And how long is his ministry going to be, Jesus? Where he's confirming or teaching his covenant among God's people? 3? Okay, I know we don't like decimals or fractions, but I feel like it's necessary. That's true for 3, But from what we have listed, it seems that it's actually 3 1/2, roughly speaking, or 3.5 if you don't like dealing with fractions. 3.5. So in one set of sevens, 3 1/2 or 3.5 would be how much of that? Half of it. Okay? So does that make sense in verse 27 when he says, he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. For half of that week, he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. His ministry begins. He's announced in his hometown and home synagogue of Nazareth, reading from Isaiah the prophet as the Messiah. Now, a lot of times it's kind of in a coded way, but the people know this prophecy. And they know a lot of these prophecies. Maybe not all of them, but many of them. They're familiar. They're looking for this one who's supposed to deliver God's people. They think from Roman oppression. He means from the oppression of sin. And when Jesus stands up in the synagogue in what appears to be the year AD 26, and he reads the prophecy of Isaiah, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has chosen me to preach the gospel to the poor, to open the eyes of the blind, to set the captives free, all of those things that are mentioned there, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. We're told that the book is closed, and Jesus goes and sits down. And all eyes are on him. That doesn't end very well for Jesus. They try to run him out of the synagogue and throw him over the side of the cliff because they think that this lowly peasant has spoken blasphemy, that he thinks he's the chosen one of God. Actually, God has said he's the chosen one. Anyway, he's announced in AD 26. He carries out this mission for half of a set of sevens, 3 1/2 years, confirming the covenant. And then we read in verse 27 of Daniel 9, for half of that week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. How does he do that? At the conclusion of the half 7, 3 1/2, he finalizes sacrifice and offering. Hebrews, which we're studying right now, adults on Wednesday night, is when he offers the perfect sacrifice once for all. No more sacrifices need to be made. He gives himself on the cross after half of that 7. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. So something or someone who is hated or an abomination will come and make the area of God's people, the temple and Jerusalem, desolate. He'll destroy it. And then we're told there's a decreed end that's even going to be poured out on the desolator, or the one who destroys Rome itself. Okay. Now, what we just read in our text today of chapter 12 in Daniel, in verse 1 is, there shall be a time of trouble such as when there never was even to that time for a nation. But then there's a promise also that's made. At that time, Daniel, your people, at that time, what time? At the time of Jerusalem's destruction, your people shall be delivered. Everyone who is found written in the book. Turn to Matthew chapter 24. Matthew 24. As you're going there, I'll mention that the prince of God's people, the ruler, the shepherd of the sheep, that great prince, he has an announcement to make to his own in Matthew 24, verses 21 and 22. Not a really cheery statement. In speaking of, go back in the first 3 verses of the chapter, he announces how Jerusalem and the temple are going to be destroyed. This is the prophecy of Daniel. It's going to be coming to pass about 40 years down the line from when Jesus is speaking. Verse 21, Matthew 24. For then, Jesus says, there will be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now. He actually steps it up a bit when he says, no, and never will be. Does that sound familiar at all? Daniel 12:1. There shall be a time of trouble or tribulation, such as never was since there was a nation until that time. He's saying the same thing that Daniel did about Jerusalem's destruction. But Daniel's prophecy goes on to state, at that time, Daniel, those who are truly your people will be delivered. Everyone who is found written in the book. So Jesus goes on in the very next verse, Matthew 24, to state this, verse 22. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved or delivered. But for the sake of the elect, those who truly are God's, and therefore Daniel's people, those days will be cut short. And those who are truly God's people are going to be delivered in this event. I don't want to go through the fullness of that right now, but I just want us to have that in the forefront of our minds, that is something we're going to encounter again. All right, I do want to make a statement here that comes from the writings of Flavius Josephus, the first century Jewish historian, as he's quoted in James Smith's Old Testament Survey Series work. So Josephus says of the Roman War of AD 66 to 70, accordingly, it appears to me that the misfortunes of all men from the beginning of the world, if they be compared to these of the Jews, are not so considerable as they were. Neither did any other city ever suffer such miseries, nor did any age ever breed a generation more fruitful in wickedness than this one was from the beginning of the world. It's not a biblical source. It's a historical one from a guy who firsthand experienced all of these things. He saw what happened, and he writes about it, strangely enough, nearly verbatim, both what the Old Testament and the New Testament and prophecy stated would take place. So I found that interesting and thought you might also. Who do you think those would be who are found written in a very special book, who would be delivered? We read of this later in Revelation, not the revelation of Daniel, but the revelation of John as the Lamb's Book of Life. Jesus advertises it in the 10th chapter of Luke, Luke 10, verse 20, and telling his disciples, nevertheless, do not rejoice in this, that the demons are answerable to you in my name. That the spirits are subject to you, do not rejoice in this, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. Now, I know I've set it up just to let it down for a moment, but I hope I don't let you down, because we will come back to this idea when the time is right. All right, so back to our text. Thanks for allowing me to deviate for a few minutes. Daniel chapter 12, verse 1. At that time, what time? Once Herod the Great, his reign is ended, 4 BC, sometime past that, Michael, the great prince who stands watch over the people of God as a shepherd, will stand up. There will be a terrible time of trouble. Jerusalem's going to be destroyed, so also will be the temple. But those who are truly God's will be taken care of through this event. Everyone found written in the book, that is the Lamb's Book of Life. Verse 2. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. You read this, many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth are going to wake up. Immediately, what do you think? Okay, good question. Marcy, why do you have to be so smart? You're a step ahead of me. I want to back up and play dummy for a few minutes. Come on, let a dummy work. All right, so it sounds like resurrection, doesn't it? For sure. Many who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake. There is. It's resurrection. It's reference. Marcy, you make a good point. Why not all of them, though? What do we know happens in the bodily final resurrection? Jesus speaking, all who are in the graves will come forth. John 5, 28 and 29. It doesn't seem like he's referencing the bodily resurrection at the end of time. The context is at that time. At what time? Sometime between 4 BC and AD 70, many, not all, but many who sleep in the dust of the earth are going to wake up. Thank you, Marty, for patiently waiting. Okay, now that's a fair consideration right there. That's really interesting. There are a number who rise surrounding the resurrection of Jesus. Now, Matthew's account makes clear, not until, though, Jesus had come out, because he has to be the first fruits from the dead. we're not told afterward. To me, these are ones who rise probably to die again. Now, that's my opinion. You might share a different one. We're not directly told. These, though, who awake, some of them will be to everlasting life, or life that never ends. I don't think it's a literal resurrection here. Now, it's a good point. When Jesus puts an end to sacrifice and offering, he rises from the dead. There are some who literally rise from the grave. We certainly know that. Many, the scriptures say, of the bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep rise after his resurrection. I believe this is a reference to a figurative resurrection. We're going to have it in our sermon hour. You don't need me to tell you. You know this very well, that our conversion is described time and again in the New Testament as resurrection. And it has everything to do with the resurrection of Jesus and the likeness of that. And I believe that's the reference right here, that at that time there will be those who are spiritually asleep, who are dead in this figure, but they're going to wake up and realize what the truth is. Thankfully, some are going to respond positively and accept it, obey it to everlasting life. Unfortunately, some, even who realize what's correct, are not going to rise to life because they don't respond positively to that message that's brought to them. Namely, I have in mind John 12, 42 and 43. John 12, 42 and 43. Nevertheless, even among the rulers, we're told, many believed in him. They understood, they saw. But because of the Pharisees and their fear, they did not confess him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue, for they love the praise of men more than the praise of God. They wake up to what the truth of God is, but as they arise in their knowledge, unfortunately, it's not to everlasting life, but it's to a permanent condemnation. And to me, that seems to be the reference here, that figurative resurrection from the dead, and not a literal one, even though there are literal ones that do take place at that time. And then there's the big literal one eventually at the end of time, but this isn't the end of time that we're discussing here. Verse 3, those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament. Okay, the sky and the sun, that would seem to be during the day. And those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. We don't have the time to read both of these, but Proverbs chapter 11, verse 30 speaks of those who are wise and who are righteous or live righteously. They do what the Lord has stated. I would like to read this one, though. If you don't mind, go to Matthew chapter 13. It's in Matthew 13 that we'll read the finale of Jesus' explanation of the parable of the tares. Matthew 13, verse 43, Jesus says, then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear. So the righteous shine like the sun, or like the brightness of the firmament, the same thing that's stated by Daniel. Jesus is teaching this in its fulfillment. And I mentioned to you Proverbs 11:30. My apologies, I got that one turned around. That's the one who's a teacher of others. It's mentioned who is wise and then in effect is going to shine. And so back in Daniel chapter 12, verse 3, those who are wise, A, they live righteously themselves. B, they teach this standard of righteousness to others. They're going to shine like the brightness of the firmament. And those who turn many to righteousness, not just one or two, but who are leading instructors in this effort to turn around, is going to be people like John the Baptist, obviously our Lord, his apostles, evangelists, teachers, preachers, missionaries. Now, it's not limited, to those in what we consider to be the big roles, But anyone who works, it's people like Aquila and Priscilla behind the scenes who are leading people to understand the truth of the Lord. Apollos, who probably doesn't get as much attention as a lot of others. So these are everyday Christians who are working to help others to understand what the truth of God is and to follow it. All right, so that's the message, the proclamation that's brought by this angel. Who would like to tell us our memory verse in number 4? Daniel 12:4. So the prophet's given this incredible information, and then he's told, oh, by the way, go ahead. Okay. Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you for that. Very good job in the memory verse too, Roy. So Daniel gets this great information from heaven. It's really exciting. Well, I say that. Some of it's not so exciting, but I mean, as far as like this revelation that's been given to Daniel, and then it's like, okay, you did your job. Now just close that book and let's move on. It's not for now. In fact, it's going to be quite a while. Just, a lot of people are going to be trying to sort all this out. Many shall run to and fro, and that might be a reference as well to there are going to be a lot of people and generations that come and go between now and then, but don't worry about it. We'll revisit it at the time of the end, not at the end of the world, but at the time of the end of what? What's prophesied, the end of Jerusalem and the Jewish state. But the time is not now. Well, if you were to receive this information, do you think you would say, okay, all right, then just move on? You want to know more, don't you? Verse 5, then I, Daniel, looked, and there stood two others, one on this riverbank and the other on that riverbank. And one said to the man, clothed in linen, who is above the waters of the river, how long shall the fulfillment of these wonders be? So there are two ways of looking at this. One would be, how long until this takes place? I'm not sure that's the question here, though. As much as, how long will all these things that have been foretold, how long will they come, or how long will they happen until all things have come to fruition? How long is this period of time that's been discussed going to be? Verse 7, then I heard the man clothed in linen, purity, who was above the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand, so he lifts up both his hands to heaven, and swore by him who lives forever, God, that it shall be, or last, for a time, singular, times, plural, and half a time, fraction, or decimal. And when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all these things shall be finished. Just a little background. We encountered this in chapter 4 already, where Nebuchadnezzar is foretold to have whatever it is that befalls him, zoanthropy. Some would classify his condition where he psychologically turns into an animal. And God sends this curse upon him, this mental disease, and he makes him lose his mind until he humbles himself, and then he restores his kingdom, his glory, and his majesty. But it's forecasted for 7 times, or 7 periods. And it's generally understood from history, as we compare all these things, that the times of prophecy are how long in periods? A year. 1 year is what they consistently seem to be. In Daniel 4 it's mentioned. At the end of 12 months makes up what? A year. And so that seems to be the time or the length of the periods. So for this one, if you have a time, how many would that be? 1. Good. Now this one's a little tricky because we're not told how many, but it's times or more than 1. As far as all that you would know for sure, it would have to be at least 2 to satisfy the plural. So 1 plus 2 equals, I know it's rough, but I think we can do this one. Okay. And then half of a time would be what? Half a year. So 3 plus half, or 0.5, gives you 3.5. So this is really fascinating if you stop and consider what we just revisited in Daniel 9. There are 77s, or sets of 7. The only thing that makes any sense there are years, and it works out absolutely perfectly if you go through and you calculate it from the time that the word is given to rebuild Jerusalem. And so you compare this, and you have 7 sevens plus the 62, which gives you 69, and then we're told there's only 1 week for which we have to account. And for half of that week, the Messiah, or the Anointed One, is going to establish a covenant with his people. And halfway through that week, or set of 7s, 3.5, He's going to put an end to sacrifice and offering, which leaves us at 69 of the sevens plus half of another, that 3.5 of that one. And all we have left accounted for in the prophecy is 3.5, or a half of a single of the set of sevens. Well, that's where Daniel 12 picks up, where Daniel 9 left off. And he says that this destruction of the holy people is going to last for a time, 1, times 2, so that's 3, and half a time, half. 3 and 1/2. So the suffering of God's people in this destruction is going to be a total of 3.5 years. And when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all these things shall be finished. Daniel doesn't get it. And so he needs an explanation. Verse 8, although I heard, the prophet says, I did not understand. Maybe it's too much math. Maybe it was too early in the morning. But he says, my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. So here he is saying, well, you can't leave me with that. Come on, tell me then after that, and what does all this mean? Excuse me. He says, hold on, good job, prophet. You've done what you're supposed to do. You weren't called by God to understand all the mysteries of heaven. You were just called to reveal the wisdom of heaven, which will be understood when the time is right. Is that not incredible that this guy has put down this intense math and all these details of history, and so much of it, he still doesn't have a clue what any of it means? How could it be perfectly fulfilled in numbers, in the unfolding of history, to the most intricate detail, and the guy not even know what he wrote? If that's not a powerful testimony to the inspiration of Scripture, I don't know what would be. Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Not the end of the world. The context is the end of the Jewish state. Verse 10, many shall be purified, made white and refined, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand. But the wise, that is those who live in accord with God's teachings, the righteous, and those who teach others to be righteous, those who dig into prophecy to understand it themselves before they can explain it, they shall understand all of this. It'll make sense to them when the time is right. Wish we had the time, we don't. But in Matthew 24, Jesus speaks of in verse 15, the abomination of desolation prophesied by Daniel the prophet. He's wise and he understands law and prophecy. And he goes back to it and he says concerning that, if you look back at the prophecy, you'll find these things. And he goes a little more specifically and he talks about the terrible tribulation that's to come on Jerusalem. But he says, when you see the abomination of desolation set up, the Roman army who is hated that destroys, get out of here. It's not safe any longer. I want to show you as we bring things together in this chart that in October of AD 66, we know from the records of history, multiple, that the abomination of desolation, that is, that which destroyed and was hated, the Roman army, stood up in the holy place, came to approach Jerusalem, ended up besieging the city a little bit later in March of AD 67. This is pretty cool, though. I want you to notice this. In July of AD 70, the temple sacrifice stops. In August, Jerusalem is burned, and the whole thing's done. Okay, so let's go through this quickly here. October or fall of AD 66. Let's count from there to the next year. 67, 68, 69, right? Okay. And that's going to take us to late AD 69, 3. Well, then notice, roughly half into the next year, it's all done. Jerusalem's been completely destroyed. from the time the abomination of desolation appears or is set up in the city of Jerusalem till the time that the sacrifice of the temple stops, Daniel 9, we're told will be a time times 1 + 2 and half a time 3.5. It actually gets a little bit neater than that, because you might be thinking, well, yeah, but it's not 3.5 exactly. I don't know if your mind operates like that too. I was thinking, well, actually, it's a little bit more. Listen as he goes on. Verse 11, from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away, and that's going to be in July of AD 70, and the abomination of desolation is set up, which actually looks backward to October, AD 66. There shall be 1,290 days. 1,290 days. So, 1290. Divided by how many days in a year? 365, rounded, gives you in terms of years, 3.53. And actually, it's widely recognized by biblical students that the prophetic calendar typically operated by 360 days, not 365. And so if you're to look at it that way, 1290 divided by 360, that gives you 3.58, or a little bit more than 3.5 years. It's a little bit more than 3.5 years, to be exact. Yeah, right. You would, wouldn't you, Roy? Yeah, no, you're right. You're right, though, technically. But isn't that fascinating that through the biblical prophetic year, the prophecy actually wasn't 3.5 exactly, but it was roughly 3.58, and it fits it absolutely perfectly. God's mind's incredible, isn't it? Yeah, I think you're right. Verse 12. We're told, blessed is he who waits, though, and comes to the 1,335 days. All right, little math here. Let's just cut off the 1,000. It makes it easier. It's insignificant for our math. 335 minus 290 leaves you with how many? What's the difference? 45. A month would be roughly 30 days. I like operating by the lunar calendar, but that's me. 30 days. And then plus 15 is a month and a half. Notice this, that the temple sacrifice ceases July AD 70. In August, Jerusalem's burned about a month later, and everything's done. About 2 weeks later, I mean, it's not a pretty sight, but it's different. Not war going on any longer. If you make it a month and a half past this 3.5 or 3.58 year period, you're good. You'll be fine from then on. Perfectly in line with the prophecy that was made in 536 BC. We're talking about events AD 70, 600 years later, to the exact days, absolutely perfect in every way. So we'll close in verse 13. If it wasn't enough, it should be now. For the third time, Daniel's told, but you, go your way till the end. You've done your job. Good job, prophet. You don't have to understand it all. When the time's right, at the time of the end, 600 years down the road, the book will be opened back up, and we'll discuss all of these things. It'll make perfect sense to people at that time. You don't have to understand it right now. You don't have to worry either. You shall rest. You've done your labors for the Lord, and you will arise to your inheritance at the end of the days. And this one, I don't think he's talking about in AD 70, but whenever the world is complete. How could you possibly rest after all of this information, some of which is utterly terrible about things that will transpire on the earth? It reminds me of one of my favorite songs that we sing together, I Will Rise. There's a piece that says, I've come to know, though earthly speaking it might not be great, my heart and flesh may fail, because Hebrews class, chapter 6, verse 19, there's an anchor for my soul. I can say, it is well. Daniel, even though he's been revealed these awful things about the future, from an earthly standpoint, God says, I don't want you to worry. I'm going to take care of it all, and I will especially always take care of you. I know it seems like on the earth everything's going to be lost, but when I raise you up in the end, you'll see that there's nothing that's been lost, but that I've saved all that's meaningful. And I hope as well that can be a peace on our minds. For the turmoil that we experience in this place, and we think, oh, this world, what are we going to, everything's going to be lost. No, everything meaningful, when it's all said and done, is going to be saved. And just as we learned on Wednesday night, Hebrews chapter 6, verse 19, there is an anchor to our soul that we can carry, the hope through the promise that our God has given us. He takes care of it all, and He will certainly always take care of us. So that brings us to the close of this remarkable work of Scripture. The book of Daniel, one of my personal favorites, if not my favorite, in all of Scripture. And I'm a little bit saddened that this study is ending, but I am excited to announce to you, as I stated at the beginning of class, the revelation of Daniel, that Daniel is told to close up because the time is not now. When the time is there, we'll open it back up and we'll revisit it. Starting next Sunday morning, we'll be looking not at the revelation of Daniel, but the revelation of John. Remember what I've been stating throughout. The book of Daniel is the book of Revelation concealed. The book of Revelation is the book of Daniel revealed. We're going to open Daniel back up through the book of Revelation starting next week. And I can't wait to see the totality of these fulfillments together. Revelation chapter 1, verse 1 is what I would ask you to memorize, the very first verse. Revelation chapter 1, verse 1. If we can get that down, the book of Revelation isn't nearly as difficult as what it appears. No reading assignment. Is that okay with you? Because we'll just introduce Revelation the next time. Revelation chapter 1, verse 1. Any closing thoughts, though, on what we've studied through Daniel, 77s? Good stuff. Paul. Oh, you're fine.
I just always noticed about to see him always be that obedient to something he didn't understand.
Couldn't agree more, Paul. For those who might not have heard, Paul was just really bragging on Daniel's willingness to stop where God stops, and when he says, hey, that's all you need to know, okay. I mean, it's hard, but okay, if that's what you say. And the restraint, self-control, we might say, of the apostle. Good. Okay, Roy, and then we'll close on this. No, he didn't, but it sure seemed like he did. Whoever told it to him must have understood, huh? Yeah, good, Roy. Okay, any others? Perfect, thank you. Really enjoyed Daniel together. Looking forward to Revelation.